I do better that way anyways.
We got headphones that don't know what we're doing.
And it's a small room, so I might just show you the most pertinent slides when I get to it.
Okay, this is Dr. Ben Edwards. He's from Veritas Medical in Lubbock. And personally, I think he's the most awesome doctor around. And I've been watching him for a couple of years now on videos, and he's been censored on the YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for what he's about to tell y'all tonight. And it's just a different version or a different idea of vaccines. And I started my vaccine journey about 7 years ago. And I truly believe that that's because God made me ready for this time. And my favorite Bible verse is Esther 4:14. And that is, for you were created for this purpose in your life. So I truly believe that was his journey for me for vaccines. And so I've really enjoyed listening to Dr. Ben, or Dr. Edwards, I call you Dr. Ben. And like I said, we're low tech. We don't know how to do this fancy stuff. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ben.
Thank you very much. Thank y'all for coming tonight. So we're going to talk about some stuff, and it's going to sound contrary to what other folks say, including other physicians. So I understand that's a little controversial. I'm not here to try to be a big controversial guy, but I do feel called to speak the truth in love. Because God told me to. So I used to be just a regular doctor. I mean, I still am a doctor, but definitely not regular. But real brief, my background, I was born and raised in Central Texas. Both my granddads are small town country doctors that could do everything. They could deliver babies, do surgeries, make house calls, take care of the whole family. So I wanted to be like them. So I went to med school, UT Houston Medical School. MD Anderson is down there. I did most of my rotations at that hospital. Went to Waco for family practice residency, because at Waco they taught family practitioners how to do colonoscopy and how to do little surgeries and how to deliver babies. And so then I was chief resident there, not because I was the smartest guy in the class, but I was the nice guy that could get along with everybody. So I'm not the type to rock the boat. I'm not the type to cause trouble. I'm very much stay in line. Don't draw attention to yourself. Be the nice guy. I got voted the nicest guy in my high school class. So I was trying to just do my thing. Went to Post Texas, Garza County Health Clinic. I was the only doctor in the county. And it was super good, according to my thinking and my plans for my life. Raising my kids in a small town. I married Jamie Fuston, who's from the Fustons from Turkey, Texas. So kind of this area. So Jamie and I were raising our kids, small town living. It was great. And the clinic was very successful. They had been unsuccessful. Success means making money. As I'm sure y'all know, y'all was a hospital and clinic here, you got to make money. And it's hard to do that in a small town. Medicare and Medicaid, if those are your primary payers, it's tough. And it's got to be volume. But so I learned that. I mean, Waco taught me how to do that. That's part of my residency training was medical economics. How do you make it work? And you make it work by volume and by procedures. Anything I could do with my hands, you get paid more. Even picking earwax out of your ear, there's a code for that. And then back in the day, it was like $120 for doing that. But the code for hypertension and diabetes, just talking to you about your diabetes and writing a prescription, that paid like $50. So I learned to do both in the same visit. You're here to see me for your diabetes and get your refill. Well, let me check your ear for some wax. Or let me check your skin for some pre-cancer I could freeze or cut out or pull an ingrown toenail or set a broken arm, or, you know. So anyways, I learned how to do that. So that clinic went from losing $5,000 to $10,000 a month in the red to making $10,000 a month. So the taxpayers' money got to sit in the healthcare district bank account and just grow because we were self-sufficient. So I did that for 7 years. And so the county was happy, the taxpayers were happy. They built a brand new clinic for us. That $1 million banknote was paid for in a year by the tax money. A year after that note was paid off, there was another $1 million that built up in the bank account of the healthcare district because the clinic was self-sustaining. We were financially sound. Texas Monthly did an article on us because we were successful. The Washington Post picked up on that and put us on the front page. They came to Post and followed us for a whole week and then put us on the front page of the Washington Post newspaper. So I'm getting a good quarterly bonus because my volume is really good at the clinic. Now we have fame. We're on the front page. The taxpayers of the county are happy. The healthcare district board members are happy, and I'm happy. Everything's going great. I'm getting to do my house calls, getting to take care of the nursing home, getting to do it all. So for 7 years, that's what I did. And then God reminded me that I raised my hand and said, I want the kingdom. Seek ye first the kingdom, then all these things will be given unto you. And he arrested me in my plan and my path and 180'd me to his path. And so I didn't go looking for a holistic alternative, something else. I didn't go hunting for vaccines good or not. Of course they're good. I was taught in med school, they're all good. I never, ever even knew adverse reactions happen besides just an anaphylactic reaction. I didn't know how to report to VAERS. Didn't even know what VAERS was, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System that we're about to talk about tonight. I was taught the CDC schedule, and I was taught, make sure your patients are on this schedule. That's about the extent of the vaccination education. And I didn't know any different. So I wasn't looking for anything different, but God had one of my employees get cured from an incurable disease. What that means is the body fixes itself. He had celiac disease. And that means you can't eat gluten, or you have major problems. Now he can eat gluten, and he doesn't have major problems. Whatever you want to call that, in remission, cured, or whatever. That opened my eyes to, whoa, maybe there's a different path. I don't want to spend so much time on this, but bottom line, I sent my 10 sickest patients to a holistic integrative medical doctor, MD, and they all came back well. Lupus, fibromyalgia, type 2 diabetes, chronic urticaria that nobody could figure out that's a rash that she'd been to all the dermatologists in the world, lupus, super sick people, and they came back well. So at that moment, this was about 10 years ago, I was faced with the question in my mind of, do I ignore what I just saw? These are my 10 sickest patients I've ever had, and they've been my patients for 7 years. I started most of these medications on them. I'm the one that referred them to all the specialists and watched them come back, not really any better. So I knew these people really well, and now they're better. So morally and ethically, I felt obligated to learn, how did they get better? And it turns out, inflammation, even conventional regular doctors know there's a link between inflammation and all chronic disease. So we'll move into what we're going to talk about tonight, but I just want to say, if you ask other physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners, nurses, anyone who is conventionally trained in an allopathic model, which I was, you're going to get a certain answer. My answers tonight are going to be different because I have a different perspective. I would encourage you to ask those same doctors, nurse practitioners, and PAs, have you ever seen a type 2 diabetic who is on maximum oral therapy and ready for insulin with an A1C of 12 have normal blood sugar in 4 months off all their medicine? Have you seen an eczema, a 7-year-old kid with eczema so bad, and had been to every dermatologist from here to Dallas, and the mama unwraps his legs, ace bandage on both legs, pulls his sweatpants down, unwraps ace bandage, and there's cotton wrap, and there's a Vaseline wrap, and he's as red as that sweater from hips to toes, excoriated and bleeding, and every night mama has to wrap him up like this. Getting better, completely cured. ADD, asthma, worst asthma, this kid couldn't run up and down the basketball court. On full medication, had a 7-year-old girl, they told her she's allergic to dirt and air. and smoke and everything. She's just allergic to everything. On Singular, and I had Zyrtec, on the steroids. Can't go out to the playground with her friends in first grade because she's allergic to outside. They changed out the wood burning logs to gas burning logs. She had to quit Girl Scouts. She couldn't do anything. She'd been to all the specialists. It was all related to inflammation, which mostly comes from eating the wrong food, eating man food instead of God food. When we eat unprocessed food that God intended for us, the body functions. That's the bottom line. So I just had there was a lady from Stephenville, was our patient from 2014 to 2016. She came with rheumatoid arthritis. She had failed the medications. They weren't working. Her joints were so inflamed. She came to see us. In over 2 years, she changed her diet and lifestyle. She quit stressing out so much. She quit processed grain, processed sugar, and vegetable oils. She got her gut microbiome balance back out. She got her minerals right, which means get your iron down, get your magnesium up, get your copper up. But she gave her body what it needed, and her symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis dissipated. She was weaned off all her medication, and that was in 2016. She was so well, she quit being our patient, which is our goal. Every single patient that walks through our door, I want them to never walk through the door again. Get well and go away and never come back. You were designed to be well. So that patient, that from 2016 on, never heard from her. She called me the other day. Doc, I need a vaccine exemption form filled out by my doctor, but I don't have a doctor because I'm well. I've implemented everything, and my family's implemented everything you've taught, and my body stays well, and my company is going to raise my health insurance if I don't get this gene therapy, experimental gene therapy. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's no FDA-approved vaccine. This is gene therapy. Real quick tangent. I had a sweet, sweet little girl. You can look her up on the internet. Bren's Smiles is the name of her nonprofit. Sweet little girl from Post, Texas, has a rare genetic disorder. When she was born, when I was down there in Post, we didn't know how long she was going to live. Was it a year or 2 years? There's only like 10 of these cases in the whole world. It took them a year to figure out, or two, what she even had wrong. So she has a gene that's just missing. I would be 100% for, I would drive her to that facility if they had a gene therapy injection for her to try, because her disease is fatal. Most kids live, into their early teens maybe. It's a fatal disease. She's missing genetic material. If Moderna could give that particular gene back to Bren, I would be 100%. Moderna tried for 10 years to perfect this kind of gene therapy, but they didn't prove it to me or you or any other doctor. That's the caution I have. I'm not anti this technology. As we'll see in a minute, any medical therapy, you weigh the risk versus the benefit. And if you kill 7 people to save 1, or you kill 41 to save 1, then probably we wouldn't do that therapy. Back to where I was going. If you ask any doctor, have you seen rheumatoid arthritis go into remission? Have you seen psoriatic arthritis go into remission? Ulcerative colitis. We had a young lady, 23 years old. She got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis when she was 13. She had a colonoscopy every single year for 10 years in a row. And the GI doctor, every single year, I have the reports, highly inflamed, ulcerated colon. And on that 10-20 said, if this continues, we're cutting out your colon. And she came to see us, and she changed her diet and lifestyle. And her colon symptoms went away. And she went and got her 11th colonoscopy, and it was totally clear. I think that doctor asked her, what in the world did you do? No. It's so far beyond our ability to even comprehend that when we walk across that medical school graduation stage and get that diploma, we think, I just learned everything there is to help a patient. That's what I thought when I walked across that stage, and I guarantee you that's what every nurse, prac, PA, and doctor anywhere around here thinks. We think we learned everything there is to help them. And I'm just telling you, the sad fact is that's not true. Go ask your doctors, nurse practice or PAs, did you learn to manage asthma or reverse asthma? Did you learn to manage hypertension, manage diabetes, manage acid reflux, manage osteoarthritis, manage ulcerative colitis, manage rheumatoid arthritis? Fill in the blank. And the answer will be yes. We manage asthma. So what's that mean? Okay. One time my wife had a slow leak on her tire on the Tahoe. And a real slow leak, enough where she could get by for about 5 days where it was flat. So I could just air it up, get the air back in there, and she was good to go for a few days, but slowly it'd lose that air again. And on the fourth or fifth day, I'd fill it back up. And then on the fourth or fifth day again, I go fill it back up. And I did this for many weeks. That's management of a problem. It's working. We're getting by. The problem's still there, but I'm doing something to kind of let it just be okay for a little bit. As long as I keep doing that thing, and it only cost me 25 cents at the filling station to get the air thing to turn on, so it's pretty cheap. My copay doesn't pay for it, but as opposed to just fix the hole. Now that seems super obvious, right? I'm telling you guys, that is the exact same thing. Exact same thing that doctors in the United States of America learn to treat y'all. Keep filling the air every week instead of fixing. The problem with that is there's unintended consequences to not getting to the root of it and fixing it. My wife, her car, those 5 days when it's getting lower and lower in the air, that's probably getting her alignment off, putting more pressure on the other tire, getting her shocks and struts and who knows what else. Not good for the life of the tire. The tire's not going to last as long, going up and down every 5 days. Increase her risk of death or blow out and a roll over and dying. I didn't think of any of that. I thought the quick fix, it's easy and it's cheap and it's quick and I don't have to do much but spend 5 seconds putting some air. And it's the same thing. 100 years ago, medicine changed in America. The Flexner Report, 1911, 1912, Abraham Flexner reported back to Rockefeller and Carnegie, who commissioned him to do this. He went around the entire country to evaluate all the medical education curriculum in the country. There was homeopathic medical schools in the late 1800s. More homeopaths. 5,000 homeopathic doctors had graduated from homeopathic medical schools in America. There were osteopaths, there were allopaths, which is what we have today. There were chiropractors, herbalists, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, all kinds of different curriculum. Flexner came back and said, there's too many different curriculums. It's chaotic. We need to standardize it under one model, allopathic. Rockefeller and Carnegie put all their money to the allopathic schools, got with the AMA, called everybody else a quack, and the thousands of years of healing arts. Every other healing art out there worked with the body's ability to fix itself. Were pushed aside and marginalized or even made illegal. And the allopathic model was given the stamp of approval, the funding to go with it. Everyone else is a quack. We're 100 years down from that now. And guess what? 100 years of just airing up our tire, we're the sickest country in the world with the worst health outcomes. Pre-World War II, we're the healthiest, now we're the sickest. 54% of our kids have a chronic disease. We die younger in America than any other country, any other industrialized country. Our life expectancy is the lowest. We have the most diseases of anybody else. We spend the most money, go to the doctor the most to get the worst outcomes. So I'm telling you all this to frame what I'm about to tell you. It doesn't line up with the narrative of all the other doctors and the institutions that these doctors look to. Because doctors look to the Texas Medical Association. I just got an email from the TMA this week. It said, Omicron is here. But don't worry, we know what works. Masking, PPE, hand sanitizer, socially distanced, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to show you 400 studies. Not every single one, it's a summary, but 400 papers that totally contradict that. We do know what works, and early treatment works, and we're going to talk about early treatment. But what I'm saying is the TMA parrots this thing, the AMA, the CDC. I have a family member in the medical field, and they look at me and said, "What? The CDC? You're saying the CDC is not saying accurate information?" They can't. This family member cannot conceive and can't believe it. And I understand it. It's called cognitive dissonance. There's just no way. I went through a year of cognitive dissonance when I transitioned out of conventional allopathic medicine into what I call kingdom medicine now, truth. It's hard. And not everybody's up for it. It's easier to just stay in your lane, stay in your comfort zone, stay in your whatever makes you feel comfortable. All right, a few slides that I'm going to show. This should have been headline news today. Every single one of y'all should already know this. This should have been on your radio station's afternoon report. It should have been on the 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock news. It should have been on your phone popping up like an alert, news alert. They should have broken in. Latest VAERS estimate, 388,000 Americans killed by the COVID vaccine. That is Steve Kirsch's article. You can go look it up on his website. And he's got a $2 million bounty, reward, bet, wager to any doctor. Any doctor at Tech, any doctor from Amarillo, any doctor at the Texas Health Department, any doctor at the FDA, any doctor at CNN, Mr. Gupta, Dr. Gupta. And Kirsch knows these doctors, and he's emailed the FDA. And he showed them this data. Kirsch, Kirsch, Steve Kirsch. And all these are on my Telegram channel, Veritas Medical Telegram channel. So you can go on Telegram app and it'll be on there. And I interviewed Steve Kirsch on the podcast, so it's on there too.
Can you spell that here?
Veritas.
Veritas, Veritas. Veritas Medical on Telegram. So this data, this isn't just Steve Kirsch pulling this out. So who's Steve Kirsch? He's not a doctor. He's a gazillionaire. He's some entrepreneur, tech guy. I'm not even sure what all he does, but he sold a bunch of companies. He has like $1 gazillion. And he funded a bunch of statisticians to look at this stuff. His team of MIT kind of trained statisticians. And they have come to the same conclusion through 8 different analytical techniques. Go on there and look at it. I'm going to throw some stuff at y'all tonight. I hope you do record it, write it down, or watch this video later, because I want you to go research this. Don't believe a single thing I say. Go look at it yourself. The point I'm really going to try to make to you is, why aren't you hearing this on the news? And that's the next slide. The Trusted News Initiative.
You lost it.
The Trusted News Initiative, go look it up. The BBC, Reuters, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, and Microsoft announced on December 10, 2020, they would form a monopoly on information. It's right out there, guys. They're not even hiding it. Go look it up. Trusted News Initiative. We're going to control the conversation around COVID-19 and the mRNA vaccines. What specifically did they say they were going to control? 7 specific topics. I'll read them real quick. Suppression number 1. They're committed to suppressing any discussion on the source of SARS-CoV-2. Number 2, denial of early treatment of COVID. Number 3, the voices of dissenting healthcare professionals. Like me. Number 4, we're going to suppress the record number of serious post-vaccine side effects and deaths, which we're going to get into those numbers in a minute. Suppression number 5, natural immunity is stronger than vaccine immunity. They're going to suppress that information. Number 6, the evidence of pathogenic priming. What that is, historically with coronavirus vaccines, going back 20 years to SARS-CoV-1, 20 years ago, they put millions and millions and millions of dollars into trying to find a coronavirus vaccine 20 years ago. After that first outbreak, what happened? The animals died in the study. So how exactly did they die? They gave them the coronavirus vaccine, and they waited a few weeks. They drew their blood. They tested for antibodies. Yep, they made antibodies. Then they exposed those animals to a coronavirus out in the wild. And they had an exaggerated immune response. Antibody-dependent enhancement is a scientific name for that. And in one study, every single ferret died. They were unsuccessful. RSV, that germ or that virus little babies get, it's a bad one. Hospitals can fill up in the winter with it. I hated to be on pediatric rotations in the winter because I knew RSV. I'd be up all night with all these babies. I love babies, but I love sleeping. Back when you're in medical school, you're like, oh, please don't give me pediatrics during RSV season. Because in the summer, pediatrics is super easy. Anyways, RSV is similar to coronavirus. They tried an RSV vaccine back in the 60s, I believe. 2 or 3 kids died, and they shut it down. Dengue is similar also to coronavirus, same thing. So this antibody-dependent enhancement is a tough deal. It's never been overcome before. So all these scientists were saying, watch out, watch out. All coronavirus vaccines prior, we saw this antibody-dependent enhancement where all the people died after the vaccine when they got reintroduced or re-exposed. So it was just like this warning, and all those scientists were shut out. Nobody, unless you knew where to go look for them, heard. The general public never heard that warning. And that was going to be one of suppression number 6. Suppress any information about pathogenic, priming, or ADE, antibody-dependent enhancement. Suppression number 7, the central role of comorbidities in serious COVID disease. I talked to a surgical ICU doctor out of Lubbock. ICU doctor sees COVID. He told me this was a pandemic of the obese. Obesity was the #1 risk factor for having a bad outcome. That was his opinion. My opinion, which, I mean, I agree with that, but the #1 for me, well, #1 is fear. When you go into fear mode, it shuts your immune system down. #2 is your most highest risk factor is who your doctor is. If your doctor treats early, your chance of success is very high. And I'm going to show you some doctors that have treated over 100,000 patients with a 99.99% survival rate. All right. I'm going to read one quote. On that suppression #1, SARS-CoV, the origin of it, I mean, Fauci, he's already been exposed. Here's a quote. When Fauci and Peter Daszak were talking. Quote, this is 2015. Until an infectious disease crisis is very real, present, and at an emergency threshold, it is often largely ignored. To sustain the funding base beyond the crisis, we need to increase public understanding of the need for a pan-influenza or pan-coronavirus vaccine. A key driver is the media, and the economics follow the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. End quote. Peter Daszak. I brought these 3 books tonight and some others. You want the references, you want the patents, you want to see the evidence that Moderna was working on a COVID vaccine before the pandemic. You want to see all the cross-contamination between NIH, NAID, Wuhan, and every Hopkins, all of it, it's laid out. Get John Kennedy or Robert Kennedy's book and read it. COVID-19, global predators, we are the prey. 1,000 references in here. You could argue this, you could debate it, but there's 1,000 points that you would need to argue that are documented. Effectiveness of early treatment, that's the #2, suppression. When this thing came out of wherever it came out of, we didn't really know what was going on. Everyone's kind of running around scared. It hit New York. And there's a doctor, family practice doctor named Vladimir Zelenko, Monroe, New York. He takes care of 25,000 Orthodox Jews that live in a very small area, meaning this thing, when it hits, it's going to spread like wildfire through these guys. So Dr. Zelenko went to the literature And what he found was this article. Chloroquine is a potent inhibitor of SARS coronavirus infection and spread. That article was from August 22nd, 2005. So Dr. Zelenko, being a good doctor that he is, because a good doctor will go to the best available evidence. Second, he will use his clinical experience. And third, he will consider his patient's wishes or patient values. What I just quoted there was the definition of evidence-based medicine. Doctors forget. Doctors think it's just published data, published data. Show me a randomized controlled trial. Evidence-based medicine is 3 points. The best published data you can find, which these days you've got to really look hard to see who funded it, how corrupt is it, how did they twist the numbers. But the best available evidence, your clinical experience, and the patient's values. So he found the best evidence from 2005 that chloroquine could inhibit the first coronavirus, SARS-CoV-1. Maybe it'll do it for COVID-2. So he went to his patient and said, hey, do you want to try this? And the patient's probably said, well, what's the risk? Chloroquine's super safe. So he uses clinical judgment to administer it. That's being a good doctor. And what he found was great success, as opposed to a high mortality rate in the elderly and the obese. His was like a 99% survival rate. That was way early, like April, first month of the pandemic or second month. Now we're 2 years in, and you can go, and I would encourage you to write this down, take it to your doctor if your doctor says there's no treatment for COVID. C19HCQ.com. And what you will find are 302 trials, 4,799 scientists, and over 400,000 patients. In the trials that are conducted early in the disease process, there's 33 of those studies, 64% improvement. There's a 75% improvement in mortality rate if you started early. C19HCQ.com. Green versus red. You see on this graph, all the green over here versus red. No, it's hard to see. Green means it was a positive effect of HCQ in that particular study. Anytime there's a study that had a positive effect, they put a green dot. And red, it means it didn't help. Up here up top, these are early treatment. You've got to start early for hydroxy. This is ivermectin, C19ivermectin.com. The green is positive, the red is negative. If the study showed positive benefit of ivermectin, it's green. You see a lot of green on there. This isn't just 1 or 2 studies. This is 70 controlled trials of ivermectin. So anyone that says there's no evidence, no proof, and there's no treatment, they simply haven't looked at the data. They've listened to the AMA and the TMA only. 70 trials, 669 scientists, 49,000 patients, 31 of those are randomized controlled trials, 83% improvement in prophylaxis trials, 66% improvement in the 29 early treatment trials. Another doctor early on, April of 2020, April. This doctor in Orlando, somewhere in Florida, I think Orlando, but it's Dr. Rajter, R-A-J-T-E-R, April 2020. He's got an elderly lady in her 90s. She's got COVID. She's dying. He calls the son. Son, get up here. Talk to mama. She's going on the vent. She's probably not going to make it. The son gets up there and says, doctor, no, please don't do the vent yet. There's got to be something you can try. April 2020. Dr. Rajter goes to the literature one more time and looks and searches, and he finds one study, I think out of Argentina or Australia, one study of ivermectin in a petri dish in some monkey kidney cells that had COVID. But in 48 hours, the viral replication was completely stopped. Now that would be considered not a great study because in a petri dish, it's not in a person, it's a monkey kidney cell, not a person, blah, blah, blah. So it's a weak study, but it was the only one out there, the best there was. So he used the best available evidence, his clinical experience, and the patient's values. The son was asking for it. And the son said, what's the downside to ivermectin? And the doctor said, none. It's safer than Tylenol. It's FDA approved, and it's been around for 40 years and won the Nobel Prize. People in Africa take it every week for prophylaxis. So the son said, give it to her. The lady immediately started getting better, didn't get ventilated, and survived. This is the doctor in Japan who won the Nobel Prize with ivermectin. They co-won it, co-winners. He discovered it and he implemented it. He got the Nobel Prize. So this doctor reviewed, this is later in the pandemic, he went and looked at all the literature that was starting to come out on ivermectin and COVID. And he said, ivermectin needs special approval for the early treatment of COVID-19. He reviewed all the data and he came to that conclusion. It works. The guy that won the Nobel Prize. But then there's another, well, maybe he's biased because that's his pet drug. He got the Nobel Prize with it. So here's a study, New Microbes, New Infections, 2021, September. The name of the study, ivermectin, a multifaceted drug of Nobel Prize honored distinction with indicated efficacy against a new global scourge, COVID-19. Quoting from this study, they say, recently, Dr. Satoshi Umura, that's the Nobel Prize laureate, and colleagues conducted a comprehensive review of ivermectin clinical activity against COVID-19, concluding that the preponderance of the evidence demonstrated major reductions in mortality and morbidity. Our review, so this is these guys, this independent reviewers of this study, our review of the evidence, updated with consideration of several new studies, supports the same conclusion. So translation. The Nobel Prize guy looked at all the data and said, whoa, ivermectin works for COVID. Then these guys looked at all of it and said, that guy was right. We agree. It looks great for COVID. And I'm not going to go through them all. This is the head of the Tokyo Medical Association, kind of like the AMA over here, but the Tokyo AMA. And he says, let's do it. Tokyo was in the middle of a surge. He said, give it to everybody. They did, and their curve dropped. These are countries in Africa, brown versus blue. The blue countries routinely take ivermectin all the time for different parasites. The countries in the brown don't. So you see the curves. The brown curve is the countries who never take ivermectin. This is a death curve for COVID versus this blue curve on the bottom. It's pretty much a flat line. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on ivermectin, except to say, unfortunately, judges are having to force hospitals and doctors to give it at the family's request. And there's an article about a judge. This is from the summer. Ralph Lorigo, attorney from New York, has gone to court to force hospitals to give ivermectin to ventilated patients 12 times. 12 different court cases he's had that in the summer. Now it's up to 129. He won 11 out of 12 cases, and 9 of those patients are now home, and the 10th is rapidly improving on ivermectin. I guess the country needs more lawyers and less doctors. His current data that I last saw was 129 patients. If they got the ivermectin in the full course of it before they died, they all survived. And let me tell you, these are sick, ventilated patients that have been in the ICU and been sick for weeks because when you're sick for a week or two and you don't get treated, you get told to go home until you're blue and can't breathe and show up at the hospital. So now you're 10 days, 14 days in, and they treat you with remdesivir, and that's a whole other story I'm not going to get into. And so you're in the hospital for a week or two, and you're in the ICU. So, I mean, you're a good 3-4 weeks into your course of illness. And then your family member says, give them ivermectin. The hospital says no, and you fight for another week. Then you go to the judge, and there's another week of fighting. And how do I know this? Because I was involved in one of these cases against Baylor Scott and White, and it drug out. And unfortunately, that judge said no, and that lady died 2 days later. But Ralph Lorigo, 129 cases, if he's gotten to get the ivermectin to him, they've lived. After a month of being sick, the ivermectin still worked. So some doctors will say, well, you're just a family practice doctor. You're not a hospital doctor. You're not an ICU doctor. FLCCC.net is a bunch of ICU doctors. Not only just any ICU doctor, they're like the cream of the crop. the endowed professorship and head of the department at University of East Virginia. That's Dr. Merrick, Paul Merrick. So flccc.net, if you need the credentials, you need all that published data. These guys have published more as ICU doctors than any group of ICU doctors in the history of the world. They're the most published doctors. These are smart guys. Tess Lawrie, she's a PhD researcher. Evidence-Based Medicine Consortium is her company in the UK that contract with the WHO. The WHO calls Tess Lawrie when they want any evidence of any medical thing about anything. Way before COVID, she was their main go-to when we want an answer, we want the evidence, we want the truth. Here's what Tess Lawrie said when she looked at the ivermectin data. 60,000 people died in the UK unnecessarily due to blocking of ivermectin. That's Tess Lawrie, Evidence-Based Medicine Consultancy. And here's what the AMA sent. This was probably July or August. They emailed this out to us. The AMA strongly opposes the ordering, prescribing, or dispensing of ivermectin. This is why your doctors and pharmacists aren't even, because they listen to the AMA. We just had a patient from the VA, their VA doctor, when they asked their doctor, can I have ivermectin? They laughed at the patient and said, of course not. Why are you even asking me that? That was this week. I had to fight with a pharmacist down in Kerrville. We had a patient, 320 pounds, and he waited too long. His kids blew right through it. His wife got over it in like a few days. He thought he would too. He didn't. 40 to 50-year-old guys who are overweight, it's a bad deal. I mean, you got to jump on that. And he waited till like day 10 and he called us on a Friday afternoon, out of breath, oxygen saturation, low 70s or upper 70s, low 80s. And he refuses hospitalization. He is not going to go, period. If he dies, he dies. He told his wife, do not take me. I'm of sound mind. Don't do it. And she wasn't going to do it. We got oxygen there. An oxygen company was open that night. We got to open up late at night. Got him the oxygen. Called in all the meds. Got the nebulizers going. But the pharmacist refused ivermectin. And I got on the phone to her and said, why? It's not FDA approved. It is FDA approved. Well, not for this. Off-label drug usage, we do it all the time. 60% of the prescriptions you filled today were off-label. Well, not at this high dose. High dose, 0.6 mg per kg is the dose. I mean, this lady, and she finally said it. I'm not going to lose my license over this. I said, okay, so you're going to let someone lose their life over that, over your license? Thank you, goodbye. I don't usually get too hot and mad. I'm pretty lay low, calm. And that lady had me pretty hot. Anyways, the guy's doing a lot better. He got his ivermectin from somewhere else. Dr. Brian Tyson's down in Southern California, 6,200 patients treated, 0 deaths. And these are high-risk patients, Southern California, overweight, diabetic. MyFreeDoctor.com, Ben Marble, over 100,000 patients treated, 99.99 survival. Stella Manuel, she's over 100,000 also now, same survival rates. There's Dr. Brian Proctor, he actually published this data early on, and it's 75 to 85% reduction in mortality if you start these drugs early. This is a doctor, he put this out on Twitter. Dr. Saeed Haider, I don't know him, but here's his experience. My experience using ivermectin and fluoxamine. Fluoxamine is just a different drug that decreases hospitalization and death. In 4,000 acute COVID patients, 5 hospitalized, 0 died, 4,000 recovered, 5 pharmacist threats, 1 medical board complaint, 1 lawyer retained, hundreds of medication transfers for pharmacist refusals. That means the pharmacy wouldn't fill it. He's treated 4,000, and 4,000 have survived. Dr. Peter McCullough, I'm sure y'all have seen him using Amarillo. He's on the news all the time. This is his protocol. If your doctor's willing, I would recommend they go to aapsonline.org. You can go there yourself, download the treatment guide. It's all there. All the literature's there. The references are there. If you don't like ivermectin and hydroxy, it's controversial, go to C19 early and you will see 30 other things you can use for COVID. Budesonide, vitamin D, all kinds of stuff. And I know y'all can't see this, but I'm going to tell you, green dots mean positive outcome, had a beneficial effect. Iodine is on here, a simple mineral, squirted up your nose. It reduced COVID transmission like 50%. But green dots are positive, red dots are negative. There's one red dot at the bottom. 30 different treatments that show positive effects. So you don't have to use ivermectin. There's lots of choices. All right, suppression number 3, the dissenting voices of other doctors. And this is what shocks people. When I quote these to other doctors who are still listening to AMA only and this news, mainstream media news, they literally can't believe that these guys say this. Why don't they believe? Because they've never heard it. How could the CDC not be saying this? This is Luc Montagnier. Luc Montagnier is a virologist. He won the Nobel Prize in 2008 for discovering HIV. I mean, he discovered HIV a long time ago, but they gave him the prize in 2008. He's a world-renowned virologist, expert in the field. Quote, it's an unacceptable mistake, a scientific error as well as a medical error. The history books will show that it's the vaccination that's creating the variants. And this is part of a conversation where he said we need to stop the vaccination in the middle of a pandemic. It will create the variants. This is Michael Yeadon, VP of Pfizer. Yeadon said he's pro-vax. He's taken every vaccine that's been available. His kids have taken every vaccine, and his grandkids have taken every vaccine available, minus this COVID one. He said, I'm retired and living pretty high on the hog with a bank account, he said some kind of millions in retirement, because he was VP of Pfizer. He made his living off vaccines. He's totally pro-vaccine. Quote, there's absolutely no need for vaccines to extinguish this pandemic. I've never heard such nonsense talk about vaccines. You do not vaccinate people who tested on human subjects. The next one is Dr. Gert. This should be household names. Gert Vanden Bossche, formerly of GlaxoSmithKline Biologicals, formerly of Novartis Vaccines, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Vaccine program known as Gavi. So he's worked for all these big vaccine people, pro-vaccine. Quote, this type of prophylaxis vaccine is completely inappropriate and even highly dangerous when used in mass vaccination campaigns during a viral pandemic. Unless I'm scientifically proven wrong, it's difficult to understand how current human interventions will prevent circulating variants from turning into a wild monster. There can be no doubt that continued mass vaccination campaigns will enable new, more infectious viral variants to become increasingly dominant and ultimately result in a dramatic incline in new cases, despite vaccine coverage rates. There can be no doubt either that this situation will soon lead to complete resistance of circulating variants to the current vaccines. That was March of 2021. This is Delta he was predicting, and it came. And the vaccine, which is gene therapy, the spike protein that shot causes you to make the spike protein, that was the old spike protein. That was the original alpha variant. The Delta is totally different. It's not covered at all by that, and that's why you're seeing breakthroughs, these huge spikes in cases in the vaccinated. He predicted it. And he went on to say, I'm anything but an anti-vaxxer. As a scientist, I do not usually appeal to any platform of this kind, meaning LinkedIn. He put this out on LinkedIn. I usually do not appeal to a platform of this kind to make a stand on vaccine-related topics. As a dedicated virologist and vaccine expert, I only make an exception when health authorities allow vaccines to be administered in ways that threaten public health. Most certainly when scientific evidence is being ignored. The present extremely critical situation forces me to spread this emergency call on LinkedIn because he was suppressed by the Trusted News Initiative on every single other outlet. Now, can you find a scientist of his expertise and his experience and his level of education and all that to disagree with him? Maybe. I haven't seen it yet. I've seen a lot of talking heads. But there might be. So let's hear the debate. Let's get both sides. That's called informed consent. This is an experimental gene therapy that's never been successfully used in humans before. Let's hear both sides so y'all can be informed so you decide. And that's why I'm here tonight. We need informed consent. And if you've never heard of the name Kurt Vanden Bosch or Robert Malone, we'll get to, well, first Peter McCullough, quote, the current vaccines are obsolete, unsafe, and unfit for humans. This is Dr. Peter Schermacher. He's a pathologist in Germany. He's at a university. He's considered one of the top pathologists in Germany. So a pathologist is the one who looks under the slides at your biopsies to see if it's cancer. But he also does autopsies. And he picked 40 people that died. Just happened to die of who knows what, everything and anything, within 2 weeks of their vaccine. They just happened to pass away. He did autopsies. 40% of those, he said definitively it was the vaccine that caused the death. The other 60%, he can't exclude it, but he couldn't definitively say. 40%. And he called for funding of more autopsies around the globe. He wanted all the pathologists around the globe to start doing autopsies on these people that are just dying within 2 weeks of the vaccine to see. Is it really 40%? Dr. Robert Malone, he invented the mRNA technology. He got the COVID shot, and he got the second dose of the COVID shot, and he got injured by it. But you don't get much more pro-vaccine than him. He developed the technology. You think he's got something to gain financially? Of course. He was under an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. He's not now, so he can reveal it. But all this time, when he came out against this vaccine and everyone started calling him anti-vax, he was actually developing another kind of vaccine with the authorities in India. He's all about vaccination. Here's what he said. This was June 24th. The government is not being transparent about the risk. I don't think the benefits outweigh the risk. But that was June 24th. August 5th, the vaccine causes the virus to be more dangerous. Next, quote, stop the vaccine, it's the worst case scenario. He was referring to the antibody-dependent enhancement. When you give the shot, it makes the antibody in the person, and they get exposed to coronavirus later as an overreaction. He was seeing it. This next quote is from this week. It's a little bit long. Normally I wouldn't read a whole thing, but I'm going to read his whole because it's important. Robert Malone, quote, my name is Robert Malone. I'm speaking to you as a parent, a grandparent, a physician, and a scientist. I don't usually read from a prepared speech, but this is so important that I wanted to make sure that I get every scientific fact and word correct. I stand by this statement with a career dedicated to vaccine research and development. I'm vaccinated for COVID, and I'm generally pro-vaccine. I have devoted my entire career to developing safe and effective ways to prevent and treat infectious diseases. After this, I will be posting the text of this statement so you can share it with your friends and your family. Before you inject your child, a decision that is irreversible, I want to let you know the scientific facts about this genetic vaccine, which is based on the mRNA technology I created. There are 3 issues parents need to understand. First, the viral gene will be injected into your children's cells. The gene forces your child's body to make the toxic spike protein. These proteins often cause permanent damage in children's critical organs, including their brain and nervous system. I have 2 13-year-old girls injured by the vaccine. Their brain is on fire. One fell asleep. 48 hours after the shot, she fell asleep and she didn't wake up for 28 days when they brought her to me. They could shake her to wake her up just enough to eat and go to the bathroom, and she'd right back in bed. Prior to this, she was riding her bike, going to the swimming pool, going to piano lessons, being a 13-year-old girl. Anyway, sorry. Back to the quote. Quote, brain and nervous system, their heart and blood vessels, including blood clots, the reproductive system, and this vaccine can trigger fundamental changes to their immune system. The most alarming point about this is that once these damages have occurred, they are irreparable. You can't fix the lesions within the brain. You can't repair the heart tissue scarring. You can't repair a genetically reset immune system. And the reproductive damage could affect future generations of your family. The second thing you need to know about this is the fact that this novel technology has not been adequately tested. We need at least 5 years of testing and research before we really can understand the risk. Harms and risks from new medicines often become revealed many years later. Ask yourself if you want your own child to be part of the most radical medical experiment in human history. One final point, the reason they're giving you to vaccinate your child is a lie. Your children represent no danger to their parents or grandparents. It's actually the opposite. Their immunity after getting COVID is critical to save your family, if not the world, from this disease. In summary, there's no benefit for your children or your family to be vaccinating your children against the small risk of the virus, given the known health risk of the vaccine. You and your children may have to live with for the rest of their lives. The risk-benefit analysis isn't even close. As a parent, a grandparent, my recommendation to you is to resist and fight to protect your children. 2 studies, one out of Germany, one out of Hopkins. 0 kids died from COVID, healthy kids. The kids that passed from COVID were on hospice, had leukemia, were on chemotherapy, had some massive congenital heart defect. Unfortunately, about 400 to 600 kids die every year from influenza. Swine flu influenza in 2009, 1,200 kids died that year. Every year, 400 to 600. In the 18 months of COVID, 353, I think it was, kids, and they all had pre-existing conditions. Every year, 400 to 600 died, 358 to COVID. Safe pre-existing conditions, 0 healthy kids. Last quote, this is a doctor from Ireland, Dolores Cahill, professor of the School of Medicine, University College Dublin. Quote, so I think we all have duties as doctors and scientists to say if something is causing more harm than good, which this clearly is, we should, I think, unify and call for the stop to the clinical trial worldwide. Remember, this is a clinical trial. There's no FDA-approved shot you can go get. And also that any individual prime ministers and regulators that continue the trial would have to be liable for any adverse events. Suppression number 4, the benefit of natural immunity. I'm not going to talk about it. There's 110 studies on natural immunity being deep, robust, long-lasting, probably for a lifetime. They looked at SARS-CoV-1, people that survived it. They went and found them in 2019, so that's 17 years later. They still had immunity, so it's probably for life. All right, now we're going to get to suppression number 5, the adverse reactions to the vaccine. This is what it all boils down to, guys. What they did not tell you adequately, and I can say this confidently because I've asked every single person that's come to me and said they've been vaccinated. I've asked them, did you know, did they inform you, did they tell you this shot will not prevent you from getting COVID? Did they tell you this shot will not prevent you from spreading COVID? People look at me like deer in the headlight looks. What do you mean? It's supposed to protect my grandma. As a college kid, I got it to protect grandma at Christmas. This shot has no external benefit, only an internal benefit. Let me explain that. There is nothing about this shot that if you personally take it will protect your neighbor, your friend, your family member, your coworker, your boss, your client, your patient, if you're a nurse. There is no external benefit. You will transmit it just as much as an unvaccinated person. That's the truth. But the crazy thing is that was the truth from day one. And if you really dug into it, it said that. This shot doesn't prevent transmission, acquiring or transmitting. What it was supposed to do was decrease severity of symptoms. So you have less chance of ending up in the ICU. And the early data showed that it did that. The current, though, after 6 months, that falls off the cliff because Delta's dominant now. So that doesn't even happen anymore. But let's say it did. Let's say it still improved your chances of not getting super sick. Okay, so now we have two choices. You can take an experimental, non-FDA approved gene therapy that's never been shown to be safe in humans to try to decrease your risk of ending up in ICU. Or option two, you can take hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, budesonide, iodine, and 30 other treatments that show benefit that have been around for 40 years, 60 years, and have a great safety profile, and jump on it early. And published data shows 85 to 90, just with budesonide, the inhaled steroid, 90% reduction in hospitalizations. So that's two options. That's if this gene therapy still worked against Delta, which it doesn't. It's kind of a no-brainer now at this point, and we should be honest about this and just speak the truth. But let me tell you something. The original Pfizer data, that very original data, I looked to see who could get into that Pfizer clinical trial early before it was emergency authorized for all y'all. Guess who they picked to be in these early trials? Like 18,000 were in each group. Super healthy, the most healthy. You basically couldn't have any disease. You had to be like between 18 and 65 or something. You had to be trim. No hypertension, no pregnancy, no kids. I mean, it was like the cream of the crop people. And they gave them the shot, gave them the second shot, and then they watched them for like 3 months. And what they told y'all was 95%. It worked. Its efficacy is 95%. Less than 1% of both groups even got COVID. So when you do a study on a therapy to see, you give it to half the group and the other half you don't give it to them, and you watch them and you see when less than 1% of both groups even gets exposed to the virus, you can't really make a call on anything about that data. It's called not having enough power. But when you do tease out and look at the data, the thing y'all should care about is called all-cause mortality. This is a take-home message for tonight. Walk out of here thinking, from now on, anything any doctor ever wants to give you, you ask them, what's the all-cause mortality benefit of this drug you're wanting to give me? I'm talking any drug, including statins. But for this shot, the group that got vaccinated in the initial Pfizer data, 20 people died of all causes. In the group that got placebo, 14 people died of all causes. More people died in the vaccinated group of everything, of anything and everything. Now, someone might say, well, 20 and 14, that's pretty close, and it's only 18,000 people were in the study. That's not a real big study. So that's kind of a small power, we call it. But what we should have thought was, it might just be a coincidence. It might be small and not powerful. We need to watch it, though. If we're going to emergency authorize this thing, we better watch this super close. What just came out last week is Pfizer did watch it super close, but nobody else did. And the attorneys went to court and told the judge, we want Pfizer's paperwork, their data of that first 90 days. Once they got emergency authorized and they rolled it out, December, January, February, we want the data. And Pfizer said no, and they argued with the judge and said, please let us hide this paperwork for 75 years. Literally, they said that. Go look it up. FDA's forced hand drops Pfizer's bombshell safety document. This was December 14th, a few days ago. The judge told them, no, you can't wait 75 years. You have to release 500 documents a month, I think it was. So they let their first batch out a couple days ago. From December 1st to February 28th, the first 90 days, 500 documents released. And there's one of the documents. You can go look this up. 1,227 deaths. That's 1 out of 37 shots resulted in death. 26 miscarriages out of 270 pregnancies, 2,000 cardiac events, and tens of thousands of reports of adverse reactions of some sort. They knew it. They didn't tell you. As of last week, openVAERS.com, 19,886 reported deaths on VAERS. This graph, the little red line at the bottom that all of a sudden spikes real high, these are the annual deaths reported from all vaccines combined. Flu shots, measles, mumps, rubella, all of them. Chickenpox, all the deaths reported to VAERS from 1990, that's way over here, to current. The average every year reported to VAERS for all shots is about 156 deaths a year. We hit
Just in the United States.
Yes, just the U.S. Europe came out with their data yesterday or this morning, 39,000. I mean, even my first grader is going to notice something going on here. There was a Harvard study 10 years ago that looked at all this VAERS data, 150 deaths. I mean, that's too bad for those people that died from their shot, but I'm sure it saved lots of lives, a flu shot. Harvard went and looked at VAERS and said only 1% is getting reported.
This was over what time frame?
This was
The 19,000 deaths was just in the
as of December 3rd through December 3rd.
from the time they implemented the vaccine.
Yes. This is real tiny, but you see the blue? That's reported to the WHO adverse events. These are the tiny little blues. That's all shots ever. All reports of adverse reactions, a flu shot, rubella, any other shot. These are all the other shots, super tiny. And there's the COVID one. Okay, but the question is at 19,000, is that only 1%? What's the underreporting factor? I can tell you those 2 girls injured that came to see me, they weren't reported. They took that little girl to the pediatrician 48 hours after the shot, she falls asleep, and that pediatrician said, nope, not the shot. They took her to tech, all these specialists in the room, infectious disease specialists, neurologists, to a man. The dad said he purposely asked every single doctor in the room, and to a man they said, no, won the shot. These are not getting reported, I guarantee you. There's a neurologist up in Portland. She has 2,000 adverse events out of 20,000 patients. Prior to COVID, 0 adverse events she's ever reported. Of those 2,000 adverse events, she hadn't been able to report a single one because the system's so hard to get into. That was a couple months ago, so maybe she has reported it now. But there are scientists now that have looked and drilled down to figure out the underreporting factor. There are multiple papers out. Jessica Rose reported 31x. That 19,000 needs to be multiplied by 31, is what Dr. Jessica Rose peer-reviewed study showed. Steve Kirsch and his team from MIT said it's 41x. You got to multiply 19,000 times 41. And he's got it was $1 million, now it's $2 million bet on the line for any FDA official, CDC official, or anybody, anywhere, any scientist can call Steve Kirsch and do a debate and pay him $2 million. If he shows them that the 41x, how they calculated that, came to that, is off. No one's even tried to debate. There's a whistleblower from Medicare, CMS, the Medicare Bill and Services. She has access to the Medicare only. This isn't kids, middle age, this is just Medicare. This was in the middle of the summer. 45,000 deaths in the Medicare population within 3 days of the shot is the data she pulled. She submitted that in a sworn affidavit in a lawsuit with Thomas Renz. So that's at the risk of her perjuring herself and going to jail. That was 45,000 back then. Bears was only probably at 8,000 or 9,000. So there's ways to calculate the underreporting factor. So we can debate that all day long. Is it just 19,000 times 4 or 5, or is it 41? How high is this? Who knows? But here's one thing that doesn't lie, is total death, all-cause mortality. Y'all can't see this, but this is all-cause mortality of the world. How many people died in the whole world in 2015, 2016, 17, 18, 19, and 2020, the big year of the pandemic? 0.76%, 0.76%, 0.76%, 0.75%, 0.75%, and 0.76%. That's from the last 6 years of all-cause mortality, total deaths in the world. What I'm saying is, they predicted this humongous, there'll be 2 million Americans will die if we don't do anything. These huge curves, and they were wrong. Looking at all-cause mortality for this year, I wish I could play these. This is Vermont, I believe. Yeah. Might be hard to tell, but there's a green line that's your average all-cause mortality. The blue line is this year, when the vaccine came out for Vermont, and they have the highest vaccination coverage of any state in the country. Their all-cause mortality starts to go up. Could be a coincidence. So here's Hawaii. Same thing. All-cause mortality average is green. Blue is what it was all year long. And then the vaccine mandate came in, and you see all-cause go up. This is the UK. UK keeps better data than we do. This is vax versus unvaxxed all-cause mortality. Vaccinated's in the brown, unvaccinated's in the blue. There's an increased all-cause mortality since the vaccine rollout. This is the United States. From the last 13 weeks, 65 and older is the age group we're pulling from. All-cause mortality, 71% increase compared to 2020, despite seniors being vaccinated, 99.1% at least having the first dose. This is children, girls, age 10 to 14. The 5-year average all-cause mortality in the blue. Brown is this year's all-cause mortality. And this was pre-vaccine being approved for kids, was this line, and you see it start to separate. When the shot gets introduced, the all-cause mortality starts to go up. This is probably the most telling graph of the whole thing. Maybe y'all can zoom in. This is UK data. Down at the bottom is death from COVID in vaxxed and unvaxxed. Solid blue and orange line. They're almost identical. I forget which is which. Solid blue is death rate per 100,000 of fully vaxxed, and the solid orange is unvaxxed. So that's death from COVID, blue and orange, pretty similar. Then you get to this dotted blue line and the dotted brown line, that's all-cause mortality. And the vaccinated is the dotted blue line up top. The brown dotted blue line is all-cause mortality of unvaccinated. Death from any cause. So even if you say, well, the vaccinated aren't dying from COVID quite as much, even though it's almost identical, maybe it's a little better. So they're not dying from COVID, but they're dying from something else at way higher of a rate, like pulmonary embolism, stroke, heart attacks. That's why it's so important to look at all-cause mortality. I'm going to blow through these others because it's getting late. But I'm going to tell you, kids are dying. 15-year-old kid, 2 days after his vaccine. This is a 7-year-old, stroke, hemorrhage, and died after her vaccine. There were two less than 4-year-olds accidentally got the COVID shot when they went for the flu shot, and they both have cardiac issues now. A 5-year-old died 4 days after the COVID shot. Remember, healthy kids don't die from COVID. This is after Chris Whitney, and Chris Whitney is basically the Fauci of England. Chris Whitney advised to vaccinate children, even though the advisory committee told Chris Whitney to say, no, don't approve it for 5 to 11-year-olds. He went ahead and overrode them. Since Chris Whitney advised children to be vaccinated on November 14th, 2021, deaths among children aged 10 to 14 rose 44% higher than the average over the last 5 years from 2015 to 2019. Boys saw a 42% increase in deaths. Girls see 47% increase in deaths. And you can see it on this graph. The green line is all-cause mortality in 10 to 14-year-olds, or from 2015 to 2019. The red line is 2021. More kids are dying in 2021 since the vaccine rollout than the average, yearly average. Last thing I'm going to mention, Taiwan suspends second Pfizer vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds. Iceland suspends Moderna for all ages. Sweden suspends Moderna for age under 30. Finland suspends for under 30. Denmark suspends under 18. Norway suspends under 18. France suspends under 30. Germany suspends under 30. Meanwhile, the United States pushes to go to 5 years old. Real quick on cancer, a study came out, the spike protein from the shot, you make the spike protein, it goes into the cell, it interacts with your DNA, and it shuts off your BRCA gene and your P53 gene that regulate and suppress cancer. It interacts with your genes that help to fight cancer. This study shows it. The name of the study, SARS-CoV-2 spike protein impairs DNA damage repair and inhibits BDJ recombination in vitro. Those out there that want to look it up, Viruses is the name of the journal, 2021. October 13th was a published date. Quote, by using an in vitro cell line, we report that the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein significantly inhibits DNA damage repair. So we're seeing cases like this. I know it's hard to see, pre and post shot. This is a lymphoma patient. The lymphoma it's like throwing gas on a fire. There's a doctor in South Africa. 100% of her cancer patients that were in remission, 100%, have come out of remission, not only out, but very aggressively out of remission with their cancer. Doctors are reporting this across the globe. I'm not going to get into infertility and immunodeficiency syndrome. There's now, it's called vaccine-induced immunodeficiency syndrome. The immune systems are being wiped out. I'm going to end on the cardiac, because this study just came out 2 weeks ago in the journal Circulation. This is a prestigious journal. What this doctor did, Dr. Gundry, you know, you go to your doctor and probably checks cholesterol, maybe your blood sugar, he's trying to, and your blood pressure, your weight, and he's trying to kind of give you an idea of what's your risk of dying of a heart attack in the next 5 years. If you're over 34 inches at the belly, if your blood sugar's up, if your blood pressure's up, if your cholesterol's high, you're at increased risk. It's kind of, you know, you all understand that. Well, there's some more sophisticated tests you can run on your blood to predict what's your chance of dying of a heart attack in the next 5 years. So this doctor has been running these tests, these blood tests on his patients for a long time, and he knows exactly where they're at. And then he ran it after the COVID shot. And it increased their chance of a 5-year heart attack chance from 11% chance to a 25% chance. In medical terms, that's a humongous jump. And he concluded in this study, we need other doctors to replicate my findings. It came out that there was a university in the UK who did replicate the findings. A whistleblower from that lab came out and said, we replicated Gundry's findings, but we're not going to publish it because we'll lose our funding. I don't know if you've seen all these athletes clenching their chest and dropping over on the field. remember, I'm going to go over this slide, but for a young, healthy athlete, these are your chances of survival. And if you're 0 to 49 years old, and especially if you're trim and healthy, like all these 20-year-old athletes and high school athletes, it's practically 0. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion, 2 Olympic gold medalists, an NBA point guard, the world's top static breath holder, free diver. He dives at the bottom of the ocean. He can stay there for 10 minutes holding his breath. World record holder. All got injured from their vaccine. Just this week, Manchester United defender Victor Laudolf, Italy, Italian midfielder Petr Zielinski, and French leaguer, one striker Martin Terry, all went down. That was just this.
2 in the same green ones. That's really good.
This graph. That graph showed a 60-fold increase in athletes collapsing and dying in 2021. The blue is collapsing, the red is dying. Hank Gathers, back in 92 or 90, Hank Gathers, basketball player, Loyola Marymount. I was in junior high or high school when he died on the court, and it was like shocking. And then Reggie Lewis, Boston Celtics, same thing, like in 93. It was like the world news. Super rare for someone to just collapse on the field or a basketball court. 60-fold increase just this year in young athletes collapsing. The last 3 slides and we're done. DavidMartin.world, you can go find this. This is an affidavit. Anyone can print it out and send it to their local DA or Attorney General.
What is it again?
DavidMartin.world. It's a typed out official, I think it's 5 pages, United States of America Attorney General with conscience. Basically, you insert your Attorney General versus, and he has all the defendants there, and he has all the evidence on the conspiracy. And that's a big word, and people say, Doc, you're a conspiracy theorist, aren't you? You're dang right I am. Because in the garden, Satan came and offered a bite from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, as opposed to the tree of life, and we took it. And now we think that knowledge of good and evil, and we can be in our own intelligence smarter than God's design, and that's impossible. You can't improve on God. Satan's been conspiring since the garden to deceive us. I encourage you to go home tonight, go to Revelations 18, verse 23, depending on your translation. And the great merchants of the earth were your men. And all the countries of the earth will be deceived by pharmakia. Sorcery is probably the word in your Bible. Go look it up in the Greek. It's pharmakia. The deception is on big time. The conspiracy's been from the beginning. It's full blown right now. You have to have eyes to see and ears to hear. If you submitted yourself, accidentally, inadvertently maybe, but if you realize now and get convicted by the Holy Spirit that you submitted your hope, trust, faith, and everything into a system of the world, that we know who's behind that system of the world is the prince of this world. There are 2 kingdoms, the kingdom of truth and light and love, and the kingdom of darkness. And the deceiver and father of all lies is behind that one, and he will tempt you to come over here for your security and your provision. And if you make a decision based out of fear, you just submit it to that kingdom. And I'm not like getting on to you. I'm just saying, if you get lovingly convicted by the Holy Spirit, then turn and go the other way. Confess it and go the other way. That's if you want to file something with your Attorney General, fight this in court, well, that's great too. But this is a spiritual battle. And I'm not against David Martin. I interviewed him. He's a great guy, and I hope he gets somewhere with these things. But this is a spiritual battle. Dr. Jane Ruby's got a 20-page affidavit. You can go download it on her site. And then there's this guy. Nuremberg 2.0 is coming. And we can no longer say, I was just following orders. The data's there. Everybody, every physician should be required to read this book by Bobby Kennedy. This Dr. Bregan, MD, 1,000 references in this book. You need to at least be aware of it if you're going to recommend any kid or adult go into an experimental trial of a new technology when you've got a 0.000 if you're young, and there's early treatment that works. You know why they're suppressing the early treatment? It pulls the EUA, the emergency use authorization. You can't have it. If you have a known therapy that works and is approved, EUA's off. And there are no FDA approved injections. That was a whole dog and pony show. You cannot go out tonight to Emerald, Lubbock, or Tulia and get an FDA approved COVID shot. They're emergency use authorized only. And it's against the law to coerce or force anyone to participate in a medical experiment. And it's going on everywhere right in front of our face. They're bribing kids with money and popsicle and pizza, and they're shaming them if they don't. They're firing people from their job. We're in a lawless state. That's Thessalonians. The man of lawlessness is released. But the blood of the Lamb and the testimony of the saints will overcome that dragon, Revelation says. So y'all's testimony, the blood of Jesus overcoming the spirit of fear, because that overcame us, still is here. Jesus took care of that. We don't even walk in fear for anything. Our days are days. Psalm says, you wrote my days in your book. Before I was even born, you knew my number of days. That's how I think. My day's there. I can't change it. You can't change it. Coke can't change it. The doctor can't change it. Nothing can change it. God's God. He's sovereign. He's in charge. Submit to that. Fear has no hold. The most quoted, often, and repeated thing in the Bible, like 400 times, is thou shalt not fear. So if we submitted to fear, we repent. And maybe this Reiner Fulmich, he's a German doctor, but he also has a law license in America. He's taken Volkswagen down. He's taken Deutsche Bank down. And he's got a team of lawyers around the country bringing these guys to trial. We'll see what happens. I encourage y'all to get the books. I put this one, COVID-19, The Great Reset. That's Klaus Schwab. I haven't read clips or excerpts from it. They laid it all out, guys. This was all laid out pre-pandemic. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds conspiracy.
What's the name of the book again?
COVID-19, The Great Reset. Klaus Schwab, is that blue? Sorry, COVID-19, The Great Reset, Klaus Schwab, Klaus Schwab. He's a Satanist.
In the future, you will own nothing that be happy about it.
I mean, that's horrible, but yes, it does say that.
Does the infusion do the same thing as the COVID shot?
The monoclonal antibody infusion or remdesivir?
Um,
Remdesivir is what you get in the hospital, like ICU.
Okay.
The monoclonal antibody, you get that infusion outpatient if you get sick.
Right.
No, it doesn't do the same thing. It's an antibody. People ask me all the time about it. We've seen it work miraculously in most. Some it doesn't. Usually early it works better. And it is, I mean, for those that are total purist naturalist, kind of holistic, whatever, it is a synthetic antibody. I mean, I forget exactly how they make it, but basically expose some lab animal to it, and they harvest that, and then they replicate it in a oyster or something, and harvest it, and it's a synthetic antibody. But yeah, it's definitely an option, especially if you're high risk, under 50 and trim and no healthy, no issues at all. Most people just blow right through it. But if there's any risk, mostly a little girth, then we jump on them with hydroxy and ivermectin and budesonide and an aspirin. If you come in late and you're struggling with oxygen, it's usually microclots all through the lung. The autopsies show these folks died from blood clots. The virus quits replicating day 5, 6, 7-ish. It's the inflammation and then the blood clots, and they're not getting anticoagulated aggressively enough.
So you got aspirin per day along with the rest of the treatment?
Yeah, if you're a higher risk, we jump on it with a full adult 325 aspirin. Now, if you have GI bleeding risk, you got to weigh that. But even in really sick ones, we go to prescription blood thinners like Eliquis or even Lovenox, the injection that had a guy down in Dripping Springs who had to do that.
I know so many people that say they've had COVID twice.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but can the vaccinated get COVID twice?
Good question. If you look at the literature, like hardcore, you got COVID the first time, you had classic symptoms, you had a PCR test that wasn't a high cycle threshold, you had an antigen test and an antibody test, and they're all positive. And then fast forward, months down the road, and you the same thing: classic symptoms, antibody tests, antigen test, PCR low threshold. That hasn't been published. No one has proven it hardcore like that. There are 2 studies I've seen, and both of them it was less than 1% chance of getting COVID again. But these were iffy patients. They were diagnosed with a high threshold PCR the first time or the second time, so it's questionable. Well, one of my nurse pracs definitely had it last year. Lost her taste and smell, had classic flu-like, had positive testing, and then she was totally well for many, many months, but then had a little bout of a cold where she lost her taste and smell again, and she thought it was COVID again. Her antibodies were just positive from the first time, and she got over it pretty quick, so I really don't think it was. Bottom line, we've had, 1 billion people with COVID, and if it was easy to get again, there'd be 1 billion people with COVID. So I think it's one and done. I'm with Dr. McCullough. Previous SARS-CoV, they were one and done. 17 years later, they're still immune. So I really question those folks. Did they really have it? One of them. I'm not going to say it's impossible. It's going to be super rare.
So if they keep pushing these boosters on people, are we gonna see an increase in ADE because of that, you think?
I think we are, and just that spike protein effect on the immune system. The immune system's getting hammered. And that UK data shows immunity's dropping about 5% a week. And so you boost that, even if the immune system tries to start coming back, and then you boost it and you push it
So
again.
is the booster basically the same thing as, so it's got the same stuff
Yep.
that's gonna knock out the oncology gene and?
And that's a problem if you continue to expose to the toxin, which is the spike protein, is the toxin, is what does the damage. And you keep reintroducing that, you're just getting all the risk exposure.
Yeah.
Without the benefit is the big thing. And the original benefit was only to decrease your chance of hospitalization a little bit, but that's long gone. And now that we know we can treat it so effectively, I mean, it's a no-brainer. And I know where people are going to land is, how could this be? There's no way that's cognitive dissonance. I mean, we're just in this, most of us, I think, are just good people, and we see the good in our fellow man, and we just can't imagine someone's going to purposely do this. Let's go to 2 Thessalonians. If you're a believer, a great delusion is going to come over. And I think that's where we're at. So I'm not trying to be Mr. Debbie Downer here. God's in charge, bottom line. You submit to that, that's all that matters. We are all on this earth for just a time. I don't know when my time is, and when it's done, it's done. As a believer, I can't die because I'm not this. I'm not bone and flesh and blood. I'm a spirit. I'm made in God's image. God's a spirit. I'm just changing location. So it is on, and we know the end of the book, it gets ugly, and persecution will come. And even the elect can be deceived. And the path is narrow because there's not many people on it. So my biggest encouragement is just check your thoughts. And if fear's coming anytime, you go the other way. You call that thing out. Spirit of fear is not from God. Scripture's clear on that. I did not give you a spirit of fear. So if you're letting that creep in, just confess it. I'm sorry, God, that dang devil brought fear again, and I started to buy that lie. Forgive me. And I'm going the other way. You're in charge. Nothing can touch me that you don't allow to touch me. You're my heavenly Father that will protect me and provide for me. If I have to get out of my job because they're forcing something, I'll get out of my job. God will provide. Okay, thank y'all for coming. Appreciate your, yes, ma'am.
Can I ask, okay, my son's 19 and he hasn't the vaccine. So if he does get it, and if he gets sick, what do I recommend him? He's in love it. So how will he get out of
Oh, if he gets COVID,
Yeah.
he gets sick, You tell them to call us.
Okay, that's what I want to, give me your phone number.
855-683-7482.
And it's called what again?
Veritas, that's Latin for truth, with a V, Veritas, veritasmedical.com. And I'm not here to drum up business. Like I said, my goal is to shut our clinic down. Y'all get healthy, never come. We're booked for 6 months. I've hired as many nurse practices as I can. I go give talks to convince you, number one, that pharmakia is treating your symptoms. It's not addressing the root cause. You're filling air in your tire. You're not fixing the hole. You're putting yourself at risk. Get to the root cause. Eat God food, not man food. Stay hydrated, move around, get out of your chair every hour and move. And most importantly, be at peace. We call those the 4 pillars: nutrition, hydration, movement, and peace. When it comes to nutrition, what about plants? What about animals? What about vegetarian? What about carnivore? God made the plants for us to eat originally in the garden when the soil was fertile and we were tending it and taking good care of it and all that before the fall. And that was nutrient-dense food. And we were at peace. When you're in fight or flight, you burn through your minerals and your B vitamins. Coming off the ark, God told Noah, I gave you those plants, but now you're going to have to eat the beast of the field, the meat. I think God knew we were going to not steward the land and the nutritional value of the plants, the fruits, the vegetables were going to go kaput, and they have. And the animals concentrate that nutrition for us, especially in their organs, so eat your liver. But the whole spectrum, some days I just eat plants, some days I only eat meat, some days I'm all up and down the spectrum, but it's not processed. So what I'm talking about is processed grain, processed sugar, and processed vegetable oils. Those are the big 3. Get them out. You don't want processed vegetable oil. That's canola, rapeseed, soybean oil, corn oil. All the little seed oils that have the heart on it that says heart healthy, throw them in the trash. All the oils and fats your great-grandparents use, olive oil is good. Lard, tallow, use those. Coconut oil is fine.
What about grapeseed oil?
And it's middle of the road. I don't really like it. There's avocado oil, I'd go with coconut oil or olive oil before I do that. That's the processed oils. Don't eat them. Eat the old fats that your great-grandparents used before we had obesity. You know the first heart attack came to the United States in 1912? There was 1. Now there's 650,000 heart disease deaths a year, every single year. This is a modern disease. And all these diseases are Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, stroke. They're modern diseases. Autism, all of it. From processed grain, processed seed oils, and processed sugar. You want to eat some grain? Fine. Get the wheat berries and get your grinder. It only costs $200 or $300 for electric grinder. It's super easy. I made waffles this morning. I got a cup of wheat berries, threw it in the grinder, hit the button, and 20 seconds later I had my flour. Got my baking powder, got my egg from our chickens and I got a raw milk. It came straight out of the cow, and our real butter, and I made waffles, and it was good. And we put a little dab organic maple syrup on it, straight up a maple tree from Canada. That's good food, and we had some bacon and some eggs. Who wouldn't want that? Yeah. But it was grain that was ground myself that has all the nutrition in it. We even make our own tortillas, but it's grain ground ourselves that has nutrition in it. The problem is that nutrition goes rancid in a few days, so it can't sit on a shelf for weeks. So the food, big ag, big food. So we gotta get back to how our great-great-grandparents did it.
Is it einkorn wheat that you use? Is it einkorn?
We will use einkorn, kamut, spelt, but even hard red and soft white, we'll do that organic. So we'll mix it up. We'll do barley, we'll do different things. The Ezekiel red blend, we do it ourselves, get all the blends that make that Ezekiel. It sounds crazy. I mean, maybe that's to some of y'all, real country folks. But convenience. We traded cost and convenience for our health. And now we're the sickest and we're dying and our kids are sick. Money, 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 the love of money, the root of all evil. Big pharma, big ag, all of it. They put profits above your health. Pfizer, 80 billion in profits this year. Last year, 40. They doubled. Our health, Our all-cause mortality's up. Their profit and our all-cause mortality guaranteed. Gonna go hand in hand. All right, that's enough. All
Okay.
right, thank you, Anna.
You're welcome. Some of my vaccine research and a friend of mine's vaccine research. We've been going back and forth with Melody's grandson-in-law. And I sent it to him. He said it's great info, right?
Yes, and I meant to say that. Anna's come up with this awesome list of resources. Because I just was throwing a ton of stuff at you. Talk with her, get her resource list, then go do your research on it. It's an amazing list. Good job. Thank you for standing up for the truth. And it's hard, I know, because there's professionals that have a degree and it can be a little tough and it takes some guts to stand up and put a meeting together and be kind of, put yourself out there. So, good job. It takes all of us to get this truth, and it's not gonna be for everybody. There was that. So, thank you. Being brave.
So if y'all want that, I don't have a piece of paper, but there's one over here. If you sign it with your email, I'll email all that to you.
Okay.
And I'll also email you the link to the video.
I'll send this on my computer.
You already got most of it?
I'm sorry, the slides didn't work.
Oh.
My technical skills.
Like I told you, that's the devil trying to stop us from doing it. And he didn't.
That's right. Amen.
Dr. Edwards? Okay, I did have the vaccine,
Uh-huh.
okay, but now I'm getting the booster, and, so if you get it again, do you recommend to do
If you get COVID,
that infusion? Or,
yes, that would be fine. And I would get on hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and budesonide. Those are the big three. Budesonide's an inhaler or nebulizer, you breathe it in. It's a steroid. Works awesome. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and budesonide.
is the ivermectin the one for animals?
There's a thing.
Okay, I thought there was a human one, but
It's the
my
same
cousin did say the same word.
Yeah. It's the same medicine, but I'll recommend it to you.
The human form.
So pharmacists will put Dr. Child.
Yeah.
Most specialties.